Evening from the Clark Athletic Center at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I'm Jim Lara of the NewsHour on PBS, and I welcome you to the first of three 90-minute debates between the Democratic candidate for president, Vice President Al Gore, and the Republican candidate, Governor George W. Bush of Texas. The debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, and they will be conducted within formats and rules agreed to by the Commission and the two campaigns. Tonight's will have the candidates at podiums. No answer to a question can exceed 2 minutes. Rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. But as moderator, I have the option to follow up and to extend any particular give and take another 3.5 minutes. But even then, no single answer can exceed 2 minutes. The candidates, under their rules, may not question each other directly. There will be no opening statements, but each candidate may have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The questions and the subjects were chosen by me alone. I have told no one from the two campaigns or the Commission or anyone else involved what they are. There's a small audience in the hall tonight. They are not here to participate, only to listen. I have asked and they have agreed to remain silent for the next 90 minutes, except for right now, when they will applaud as we welcome the two candidates, Governor Bush and Vice President Gore. And now the first question, as determined by a flip of a coin, it goes to Vice President Gore. Vice President Gore, you have questioned whether Governor Bush has the experience to be President of the United States. What exactly do you mean?
Well, Jim, first of all, I would like to thank the sponsors of this debate and the people of Boston for hosting the debate. I'd like to thank Governor Bush for participating, and I'd like to say I'm happy to be here with Tipper and our family. I have actually not questioned Governor Bush's experience. I have questioned his proposals, and here's why. I think this is a very important moment for our country. We have achieved extraordinary prosperity, and in this election, America has to make an important choice. Will we use our prosperity to enrich not just the few, but all of our families? I believe we have to make the right and responsible choices. If I'm entrusted with the presidency, here are the choices that I will make. I'll balance the budget every year. I will pay down the national debt. I will put Medicare and Social Security in a lockbox and protect them. And I will cut taxes for middle-class families. I believe it's important to resist the temptation to squander our surplus. If we make the right choices, we can have a prosperity that endures and enriches all of our people. If I'm entrusted with the presidency, I will help parents and strengthen families. Because, you know, if we have prosperity that grows and grows, we still won't be successful unless we strengthen families by, for example, ensuring that children can always go to schools that are safe, by giving parents the tools to protect their children against cultural pollution. I will make sure that we invest in our country and our families. And I mean investing in education, health care, the environment, and middle-class tax cuts and retirement security. That's my agenda, and that's why I think that it's not just a question of experience.
Governor Bush, 1 minute rebuttal. So I take it by your answer then, Mr. Vice President, that in your an interview recently with the New York Times, when you said that you questioned whether or not Governor Bush was experienced enough to be president, you were talking about strictly policy differences.
Yes, Jim. I said that his tax cut plan, for example, raises the question of whether it's the right choice for the country. And let me give you an example of what I mean. Under Governor Bush's tax cut proposal, he would spend more money on tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% than all of the new spending that he proposes for education, health care, prescription drugs, and national defense all combined. Now, I think those are the wrong priorities. Now, under my proposal, for every dollar that I propose in spending for things like education and health care, I will put another dollar into middle-class tax cuts. And for every dollar that I spend in those two categories, I'll put $2 toward paying down the national debt. I think it's very important to keep the debt going down and completely eliminate it. And I also think it's very important to go to the next stage of welfare reform. Our country has cut the welfare rolls in half. I've fought hard from my days in the Senate and as Vice President to cut the welfare rolls, and we've moved millions of people in America into good jobs. But it's now time for the next stage of welfare reform and include fathers and not only mothers.
We're going to get to a lot of those. Yes, go ahead, Governor. Let me just follow up one quick question. When you hear Vice President Gore question your experience, do you read it the same way, that he's talking about policy differences only?
Jim, if I could just
quick,
respond.
and then we need to move on. Yes, sir.
I know that. The governor used the phrase phony numbers. But if you look at the plan and add the numbers up, these numbers are correct. He spends more money for tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% than all of his new spending proposals for health care, prescription drugs, education, and national defense all combined. I agree that the surplus is the American people's money. It's your money. That's why I don't think we should give nearly half of it to the wealthiest 1%, because the other 99% have had an awful lot to do with building this surplus and our prosperity.
Our 3.5 minutes is up. New question.
I hope it's about wealthy people.
Governor Bush, you have a question. This is a companion question to the question I asked Vice President Gore. You have questioned whether Vice President Gore has demonstrated the leadership qualities necessary to be President of the United States. What do you mean by that?
Well, here's what I've said, Jim. I've said...
1 minute rebuttal, Vice President Gore.
Well, Jim, under my plan, all seniors will get prescription drugs under Medicare. The governor has described Medicare as a government HMO. It's not, and let me explain the difference. Under the Medicare prescription drug proposal I'm making, here's how it works. You go to your own doctor, and your doctor chooses your prescription, and no HMO or insurance company can take those choices away from you. Then you go to your own pharmacy, you fill the prescription, and Medicare pays half the cost. If you're in a very poor family or if you have very high costs, Medicare will pay all the costs, a $25 premium and much better benefits than you could possibly find in the private sector. Now here's the contrast. 95% of all seniors would get no help whatsoever under my opponent's plan for the first 4 or 5 years. Now, one thing I don't understand, Jim, is why is it that the wealthiest 1% get their tax cuts the first year, but 95% of seniors have to wait 4 to 5 years before they get a single penny? If I could respond to that, Jim, under my plan, I will put Medicare in an ironclad lockbox and prevent the money from being used for anything other than Medicare. The governor has declined to endorse that idea, even though the Republican as well as Democratic leaders of Congress have endorsed it. I'd be interested if he would this evening say that he would put Medicare in a lockbox. I don't think he will, because under his plan, if you work out the numbers, $100 billion comes out of Medicare just for the wealthiest 1% in the tax cut. Now here is the difference. Some people who say the word reform actually mean cuts. Under the governor's plan, if you kept the same fee-for-service that you have now under Medicare, your premiums would go up by between 18 and 47%, and that's the study of the congressional plan that he's modeled his proposal on by the Medicare actuaries. Let me just give you one quick example. There's a man here tonight named George McKinney from Milwaukee. He's 70 years old. He has high blood pressure. His wife has heart trouble. They have income of $25,000 a year. They cannot pay for their prescription drugs. And so they're some of the ones that go to Canada regularly in order to get their prescription drugs. Under my plan, half of their costs would be paid right away. Under Governor Bush's plan, they would get not 1 penny for 4 to 5 years, and then they would be forced to go into an HMO or to an insurance company and ask them for coverage, but there'd be no limit on the premiums or the deductibles or any of the terms and conditions.
Wait a minute.
They get $25,000 a year income. That makes them ineligible.
Look, this is a man, he's got great numbers.
Gentlemen, these are your rules. I'm doing my best. We're way over the 3.5. I have no problems with it, but do you want to have a quick response and we'll move on? We're already to almost 5 minutes on this.
Yeah,
all right?
I mean, it's just clear. You can go to the website and look. If you make more than $25,000 a year, you don't get a penny of help under the Bush prescription drug proposal for at least 4 to 5 years, and then you're pushed into a Medicare, into an HMO or an insurance company plan, and there's no limit on the premiums or the deductibles or any of the conditions, and the insurance companies say it won't work and they won't offer these plans.
Let me ask you both this and we'll move on this subject. As a practical matter, both of you want to bring prescription drugs to seniors, correct?
Correct, but the difference is I want to bring it to 100%, and he brings it only to 5%.
That's just totally false. Wait a minute, it's just totally false for him to stand up here and say that. Let me make sure the seniors hear me loud and clear.
No, it's a two-phase plan, Jim, and for the first 4 years, it takes a year to pass it, and then for the first 4 years, only the poor are covered. Middle-class seniors like George McKinney and his wife are not covered for 4 to 5 years.
I've got an idea.
Okay.
If you have any more to say about this, you can say it in your closing statements. We'll move on, okay? New question. Vice President Gore, how would you contrast your approach to preventing future oil price and supply problems like we have now to the approach of Governor Bush?
Excellent question, and here's the simple difference. My plan has not only a short-term component, but also a long-term component. And it focuses not only on increasing the supply, which I think we have to do, but also on working on the consumption side. Now, in the short term, we have to free ourselves from the domination of the big oil companies that have the ability to manipulate the price, from OPEC when they want to raise the price. And in the long term, we have to give new incentives for the development of domestic resources like deep gas in the Western Gulf, like stripper wells for oil, but also renewable sources of energy and domestic sources that are cleaner and better. And I'm proposing a plan that will give tax credits and tax incentives for the rapid development of new kinds of cars and trucks and buses and factories and boilers and furnaces that don't have as much pollution, that don't burn as much energy, and that help us get out on the cutting edge of the new technologies that will create millions of new jobs, because when we sell these new products here, we'll then be able to sell them overseas, and there's a ravenous demand for them overseas. Now, another big difference is Governor Bush is proposing to open up some of our most precious environmental treasures, like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, to the big oil companies to go in and start producing oil there. I think that is the wrong choice. It would only give us a few months' worth of oil, and the oil wouldn't start flowing for many years into the future. And I don't think it's a fair price to pay to destroy precious parts of America's environment. We have to bet on the future and move beyond the current technologies to have a whole new generation of more efficient, cleaner energy technologies.
If somebody is watching tonight and listening to what the two of you just said, is it fair to say, okay, the differences between Vice President Gore and George W. Bush, Governor Bush, are the following? You are for doing something on the consumption end, you're for doing something on the production and drilling.
Let me clarify. I'm for doing something both on the supply side and production side and on the consumption side. And let me say that I found one thing in Governor Bush's answer that we certainly agree on, and that's the low-income heating assistance program, and I commend you for supporting that. I worked to get $400 million just a couple of weeks ago, and to establish a permanent home heating oil reserve here in the Northeast. Now, as for the proposals that I've worked for renewables and conservation and efficiency and the new technologies, the fact is, for the last few years in the Congress, we've faced a lot of opposition to them. They've only approved about 10% of the agenda that I've helped to send up there. And I think that we need to get serious about this energy crisis, both in the Congress and in the White House. And if you entrust me with the presidency, I will tackle this problem and focus on new technologies that will make us less dependent on big oil or foreign oil. Well, Jim, the FDA took 12 years, and I do support that decision. They determined it was medically safe for the women who use that drug. Now, this is indeed a very important issue. First of all, on the issue of partial birth or so-called late-term abortion, I would sign a law banning that procedure, provided that doctors have the ability to save a woman's life or to act if her health is severely at risk. And that's not the main issue. The main issue is whether or not the Roe v. Wade decision is going to be overturned. I support a woman's right to choose. My opponent does not. It is important because the next president is going to appoint 3, maybe even 4 justices of the Supreme Court. And Governor Bush has declared to the anti-choice groups that he will appoint justices in the mold of Scalia and Clarence Thomas, who are known for being the most vigorous opponents of a woman's right to choose. Here's the difference. He trusts the government to order a woman to do what it thinks she ought to do. I trust women to make the decisions that affect their lives, their destinies, and their bodies. And I think a woman's right to choose ought to be protected and defended.
Governor, we'll go to the Supreme Court question in a moment, but make sure I understand your position on RU 486. If you're elected president, will you, not through appointments to the FDA, you won't support legislation to overturn this?
Well,
no?
Jim, you know, the question you asked, if I heard you correctly, was would he support legislation to overturn it? And if I heard the statement day before yesterday, you said you would order, he said he would order his FDA appointee to review the decision. And now that sounds to me a little bit different. And I just think that we ought to support the decision.
Right. On the Supreme Court question, should a voter assume, you're pro-life, you just stated your position. Should a voter assume that all judicial appointments you make to the Supreme Court or any other court, federal court, will also be pro-life? What kind of appointment should they expect from you?
Both of us use similar language to reach an exactly opposite outcome. I don't favor litmus tests, but I know that there are ways to assess how a potential justice interprets the Constitution. And in my view, the Constitution ought to be interpreted as a document that grows with our country and our history. And I believe, for example, that there is a right of privacy in the Fourth Amendment. And when the phrase strict constructionist is used, and when the names of Scalia and Thomas are used as benchmarks for who would be appointed, those are code words, and nobody should mistake this, for saying that the governor would appoint people who would overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, it's very clear to me, and I would appoint people who have a philosophy that I think would make it quite likely that they would uphold Roe v. Wade.
Is the Vice President right? Is that a code word for overturning Roe v. Wade? What code phrases should we read by what you said about what kind of people you will appoint to the U.S.
It would be very likely that they'd uphold Roe v. Wade, but I do believe it's wrong to use a litmus test. But if you look at the history of a lower court judge's rulings, you can get a pretty good idea of how they're going to interpret questions. Now, a lot of questions are of first impression, and these questions that have been seen many times come up in a new context, and so. But, you know, this is a very important issue because a lot of young women in this country take this right for granted, and it could be lost. It is on the ballot in this election. Make no mistake about it.
I'll tell you what kind of judges he'll put on there.
Vice President Gore, if President Milosevic of Yugoslavia refuses to accept the election results and leave office, what action, if any, should the United States take to get him out of there?
Well, Milosevic has lost the election. His opponent, Kostunica, has won the election. It's overwhelming. Milosevic's government refuses to release the vote count. There's now a general strike going on. They're demonstrating. I think we should support the people of Serbia and the Yugoslavia, as they call Serbia plus Montenegro, and put pressure in every way possible to recognize the lawful outcome of the election. The people of Serbia have acted very bravely in kicking this guy out of office. Now he is trying to not release the votes and then go straight to a so-called runoff election without even announcing the results of the first vote. Now, we've made it clear, along with our allies, that when Milosevic leaves, then Serbia will be able to have a more normal relationship with the rest of the world. That is a very strong incentive that we have given them to do the right thing. Bear in mind also, Milosevic has been indicted as a war criminal, and he should be held accountable for his actions. Now, we have to take measured steps because the sentiment within Serbia is, for understandable reasons, still against the United States, because their nationalism has led, even if they don't like Milosevic, they still have some feelings lingering from the NATO action there. So we have to be intelligent in the way we go about it. But make no mistake about it, we should do everything we can to see that the will of the Serbian people expressed in this extraordinary election is done. And I hope that he'll be out of office very shortly.
But what if he doesn't leave, Mr. Bush? What if all the things, all the diplomatic efforts, all the pressure from all over the world, and he still doesn't go? Is this the kind of thing, to be specific, that you as president would consider the use of U.S. military force to get him gone?
In this particular situation, no. Bear in mind that we have a lot of sanctions in force against Serbia right now. And the people of Serbia know that they can escape all those sanctions if this guy is turned out of power. Now, I understand what the governor has said about asking the Russians to be involved, and under some circumstances that might be a good idea. But being as they have not yet been willing to recognize Kostunica as the lawful winner of the election, I'm not sure that it's right for us to invite the president of Russia to mediate this dispute there, because we might not like the result that comes out of that. They currently favor going forward with a runoff election. I think that's the wrong thing. I think the governor's instinct is not necessarily bad, because we have worked with the Russians in a constructive way in Kosovo, for example, to end the conflict there. But I think we need to be very careful in the present situation before we invite the Russians to play the lead role in mediating.
How would you go about, as president, deciding when it was in the national interest to use U.S. force? Generally, Vice President Gore, how should the voters go about deciding which one of you is better suited to make the kinds of decisions we've been told, whether it's Milosevic or whether it's whatever, in the military and foreign policy area?
Well, they should look at our proposals and look at us as people and make up their own minds. When I was a young man, I volunteered for the Army. I served my country in Vietnam. My father was a senator who strongly opposed the Vietnam War. I went to college in this great city, and most of my peers felt against the war as I did. But I went anyway, because I knew if I didn't, somebody else in the small town of Carthage, Tennessee, would have to go in my place. I served for 8 years in the House of Representatives, and I served on the Intelligence Committee, specialized in looking at arms control. I served for 8 years in the United States Senate and served on the Armed Services Committee. For the last 8 years, I've served on the National Security Council. And when the conflict came up in Bosnia, I saw a genocide in the heart of Europe, with the most violent war on the continent of Europe since World War II. Look, that's where World War I started, in the Balkans. My uncle was a victim of poison gas there. Millions of Americans saw the results of that conflict. We have to be willing to make good, sound judgments. And incidentally, I know the value of making sure our troops have the latest technology. The governor's proposed skipping the next generation of weapons. I think that's a big mistake, because I think we have to stay at the cutting edge.
Governor, how would you advise the voters to make the decision on this issue?
All right,
we're way over the 3.5 minutes. Go ahead.
I think one of the key points in foreign policy and national security policy is the need to reestablish the old-fashioned principle that politics ought to stop at the water's edge. When I was in the United States Congress, I worked with former President Reagan to modernize our strategic weaponry and to pursue arms control in a responsible way. When I was in the United States Senate, I worked with former President Bush, your father, and was one of only a few Democrats in the Senate to support the Persian Gulf War. I think bipartisanship is a national asset, and we have to find ways to reestablish it in foreign policy and national security policy.
In a word, you have a problem with that? New subject, new question. Should the voters of this election, Vice President Gore, see this on domestic area, in the domestic area, as a major choice between competing political philosophies?
Oh, absolutely. This is a very important moment in the history of our country. Look, we've got the biggest surpluses in all of American history. Well, the key question that has to be answered in this election is, will we use that prosperity wisely in a way that benefits all of our people and doesn't go just to the few? Almost half of all the tax cut benefits, as I said, under Governor Bush's plan, go to the wealthiest 1%. I think we have to make the right and responsible choices. I think we have to invest in education, protecting the environment, health care, a prescription drug benefit that goes to all seniors, not just to the poor, under Medicare, not relying on HMOs and insurance companies. I think that we have to help parents and strengthen families by dealing with the kind of inappropriate entertainment material that families are just heartsick that their children are exposed to. I think we have got to have welfare reform taken to the next stage. I think that we have got to balance the budget every single year, pay down the national debt, and in fact, under my proposal, the national debt will be completely eliminated by the year 2012. I think we need to put Medicare and Social Security in a lockbox. The governor will not put Medicare in a lockbox. I don't think it should be used as a piggy bank for other programs. I think it needs to be moved out of the budget and protected. I'll veto anything that takes money out of Social Security or Medicare for anything other than Social Security or Medicare. Now, the priorities are just very different. I'll give you a couple of examples. For every new dollar that I propose for spending on health care, Governor Bush spends $3 for a tax cut for the wealthiest 1%. Now, for every dollar that I propose to spend on education, he spends $5 on a tax cut for the wealthiest 1%. Those are very clear differences. Let me just say, Jim, you haven't heard the governor deny these numbers. He's called them phony, he's called them fuzzy, but the fact remains, almost 30% of his proposed tax cut goes only to Americans that make more than $1 million per year. More money goes to the... Can I have a rebuttal here?
Sure, but I just want to see if he buys that. You say it that way, Vice President?
No, I don't, and I'm not going to go to calling names on his facts. I'm just going to tell you what the real facts are. The analysis that he's talking about leaves out more than half of the tax cuts that I have proposed. And if you just add the numbers up, he still hasn't denied it. He spends more money on a tax cut for the wealthiest 1% than all of his new proposals for prescription drugs, health care, education, and national defense combined. Now, those are the wrong priorities. $665 billion over 10 years for the wealthiest 1%. Now, and as I said, almost 30% of it goes to Americans that make more than $1 million per year. Every middle-class family is eligible for a tax cut under my proposal. Let me give you some specific examples. I believe that college tuition up to $10,000 a year ought to be tax deductible so middle-class families can choose to send their children to college. I believe that all seniors should be able to choose their own doctors and get prescription drugs from their own pharmacists, with Medicare paying half the bill. I believe that parents ought to have more choices with charter schools and public school choice to send their kids always to a safe school. I think we need to make education the #1 priority in our country and treat teachers like the professionals that they are, and that's why I have made it the #1 priority in my budget, not a tax cut for the wealthy.
Yeah, let me talk about tax cuts one more time.
We're going to a new question. Education. Governor Bush, both of you have promised dramatically to change dramatically public education in this country. But of the public money spent on education, only 6% of it is federal money.
Right.
You want to change 100% of public education with 6% of the money. Is that possible?
I do have mandatory testing. I think the governor may not have heard what I said clearly. The voluntary national test is in addition to the mandatory testing that we require of states, all schools, all school districts, students themselves, and required teacher testing, which goes a step farther than Governor Bush has been willing to go. Here are a couple of differences, though, Jim. Governor Bush is in favor of vouchers, which take taxpayer money away from public schools and give them to private schools that are not accountable for how the money is used and don't have to take all applicants. Now, private schools play a great role in our society. All of our children have gone to both public schools and private schools. But I don't think private schools should have a right to take taxpayer money away from public schools at a time when Kaylee Ellis is standing in that classroom. Let me give you another example. I went to a school in Dade County, Florida, where the facilities are so overcrowded, the children have to eat lunch in shifts, with the first shift for lunch starting at 9:30 in the morning. Look, this is a funding crisis all around the country. There are fewer parents of school-age children in the vote as a percentage of the voting population, and there's the largest generation of students ever. We're in an information age when learning is more important than ever. 90% of our kids go to public schools. We have to make it the #1 priority. Modernize our schools, reduce the class size, recruit new teachers, give every child a chance to learn with one-on-one time in a quality, high-quality, safe school. If it's a failing school, shut it down and reopen it under a new principal with a turnaround team of specialists, the way Governor Jim Hunt does in North Carolina. Here's another difference. The governor, if it's a failing school, would leave the children in that failing school for 3 years and then give a little bit of money to the parents, a down payment on a down payment for private school tuition, and pretend that that would be enough for them to go out and go to a private school. It's an illusion.
Well, wait a minute.
30 seconds, Governor. Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. First of all,
we've been talking about a lot of specific issues. It's often said that in the final analysis, about 90% of being the President of the United States is dealing with the unexpected, not with issues that came up in the campaign. Vice President Gore, can you point to a decision, an action you have taken that illustrates your ability to handle the unexpected, the crisis under fire, etc.?
When the action in Kosovo was dragging on and we were searching for a solution to the problem, our country had defeated the adversary on the battlefield without a single American life being lost in combat, but the dictator Milosevic was hanging on. I invited the former Prime Minister of Russia to my house and took a risk in asking him to get personally involved, along with the head of Finland, to go to Belgrade and to take a set of proposals from the United States that would constitute basically a surrender by Serbia, but it was a calculated risk that paid off. Now, I could probably give you some other examples of decisions over the last 24 years. I have been in public service for 24 years, Jim, and throughout all that time, the people I have fought for have been the middle-class families. And I have been willing to stand up to powerful interests like the big insurance companies, the drug companies, the HMOs, the oil companies. They have good people and they play constructive roles sometimes, but sometimes they get too much power. I cast my lot with the people, even when it means that you have to stand up to some powerful interests who are trying to turn the policies and the laws to their advantage. That's you can see it in this campaign. The big drug companies support Governor Bush's prescription drug proposal. They oppose mine because they don't want to get Medicare involved because they're afraid that Medicare will negotiate lower prices for seniors who currently pay the highest prices of all.
There can be all kinds of crises, Governor. Question for you. There could be a crisis, for instance, in the financial area.
Yeah.
The stock market could take a tumble. There could be a failure of a major financial institution. What is your general attitude toward government intervention in such events?
Yeah, first I want to compliment the governor on his response to those fires and floods in Texas. I accompanied James Lee Witt down to Texas when those fires broke out, and FEMA has been a major flagship project of our reinventing government efforts, and I agree, it works extremely well now. On the international financial crises that come up, my friend Bob Rubin, former Secretary of Treasury, is here. He's a very close advisor to me and a great friend in all respects. I have had a chance to work with him and Alan Greenspan and others on the crisis following the collapse of the Mexican peso, when the Asian financial crisis raised the risk of worldwide recession that could affect our economy. And now, of course, the euro's value has been dropping, but seems to be under control. But it started for me in the last 8 years when I had the honor of casting the tie-breaking vote to end the old economic plan here at home and put into place a new economic plan that has helped us to make some progress, 22 million new jobs and the greatest prosperity ever, but it's not good enough, and my attitude is you ain't seen nothing yet. We need to do more and better.
So, Governor, would you agree there is no basic difference here on intervening, the federal government intervening in what might be seen by others to be a private financial crisis, if it's that severe?
Can I comment on that?
You may.
See, you know, I think that the American people deserve credit for the great economy that we have, and it's their ingenuity. I agree with that. But, you know, they were working pretty hard 8 years ago, and they had ingenuity 8 years ago. The difference is we've got a new policy, and instead of concentrating on tax cuts mostly for the wealthy, I want tax cuts for the middle-class families, and I want to continue the prosperity and make sure that it enriches not just the few, but all of our families. Look, we have gone from the biggest deficits to the biggest surpluses. We've gone from a triple-dip recession during the previous 12 years to a tripling of the stock market. Instead of high unemployment, we've got the lowest African American and lowest Latino unemployment rates ever in history, and 22 million new jobs. But it's not good enough. Too many people have been left behind. We have got to do much more, and the key is job training, education, investments in health care and education, the environment, retirement security, and incidentally, we have got to preserve Social Security, and I am totally opposed to diverting $1 out of every $6 away from the Social Security Trust Fund, as the governor has proposed, into the stock market. I want new incentives for savings and investment for the young couples who are working hard so they can save and invest on their own on top of Social Security, not at the expense of Social Security as the governor proposes.
2 points.
What he's quoting is not the Senate Budget Committee. It is a partisan press release by the Republicans on the Senate Budget Committee that's not worth the government, the taxpayer-paid paper that it's printed on. Now, as for 20,000 new bureaucrats, as you call them, you know, the size of the federal government will go down in a Gore administration. In the Reinventing Government program, you just look at the numbers, it is 300,000 people smaller today than it was 8 years ago. Now, the fact is, you're going to have a hard time convincing folks that we were a whole lot better off 8 years ago than we are today. But that's not the question. The question is, will we be better off 4 years from now than we are today? And as for the surest way to threaten our prosperity, having a $1.9 trillion tax cut, almost half of which goes to the wealthy, and a $1 trillion Social Security privatization proposal is the surest way to put our budget into deficit, raise interest rates, and put our prosperity at risk.
I can't let the man continue with fuzzy math.
Both of you have Social Security reform plans, and we could spend the rest of the evening and 2 or 3 other evenings talking about them in detail. We're not going to do that. But many experts, including Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan, Vice President Gore, say that it will be impossible for either of you, essentially, to keep the system viable on its own during the coming baby boomer retirement onslaught without either reducing benefits or increasing taxes. Do you disagree?
I do disagree, because if we can keep our prosperity going, if we can continue balancing the budget and paying down the debt, then the strong economy keeps generating surpluses. And here's what I would do. Here's my plan. I will keep Social Security in a lockbox, and that pays down the national debt, and the interest savings I would put right back into Social Security. That extends the life of Social Security for 55 years. Now, I think that it's very important to understand that cutting benefits under Social Security means that people like Winifred Skinner from Des Moines, Iowa, who's here, would really have a much harder time, because there are millions of seniors who are living almost hand to mouth. And you talk about cutting benefits, I don't go along with it. I am opposed to it. I'm also opposed to a plan that diverts $1 out of every $6 away from the Social Security Trust Fund. You know, Social Security is a trust fund that pays the checks this year with the money that's paid into Social Security this year. The governor wants to divert $1 out of every $6 off into the stock market, which means that he would drain $1 trillion out of the Social Security Trust Fund in this generation, over the next 10 years, and Social Security under that approach would go bankrupt within this generation. His leading advisor on this plan actually said that would be okay, because then the Social Security Trust Fund could start borrowing. It would borrow up to $3 trillion. Now, Social Security has never done that, and I don't think it should do that. I think it should stay in a lockbox, and I'll tell you this, I will veto anything that takes money out of Social Security for privatization or anything else other than Social Security. Here's the difference. I give a new incentive for younger workers to save their own money and invest their own money, but not at the expense of Social Security, on top of Social Security. My plan is Social Security plus. The governor's plan is Social Security minus. Your future benefits would be cut by the amount that's diverted into the stock market, and if you make bad investments, that's too bad. But even before then, the problem hits, because the money contributed to Social Security this year is an entitlement. That's how it works. And the money is used to pay the benefits for seniors this year. If you cut the amount going in, $1 out of every $6, then you have to cut the value of each check by $1 out of every $6 unless you come up with the money from somewhere else. I would like to know from the governor, I know we're not supposed to ask each other questions, but I'd be interested in knowing, does that $1 trillion come from the trust fund, or does it come from the rest of the budget?
No.
Can I respond to that, Jim?
This
is a big issue. This is a big issue. Could we do another round on it?
We're almost out of time.
Well, just briefly, when FDR established Social Security, they didn't call them IOUs. They called it the full faith and credit of the United States. If you don't have trust in that, I do. And if you take it out of the surplus in the trust fund, that means the trust fund goes bankrupt in this generation within 20 years.
Vice President Gore?
Well, I think we ought to attack our country's problems, not attack each other. I want to spend my time making this country even better than it is, not trying to make you out to be a bad person. You may want to focus on scandals. I want to focus on results. As I said a couple of months ago, I stand here as my own man, and I want you to see me for who I really am. Tipper and I have been married for 30 years. We became grandparents a year and a half ago. We've got 4 children. I have devoted 24 years of my life to public service, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you entrust me with the presidency, I may not be the most exciting politician, but I will work hard for you every day. I will fight for middle-class families and working men and women, and I will never let you down.
So, Governor, what are you saying when you mention the fundraising scandals or the fundraising charges that involved Vice President Gore? What are you saying that the voters should take from that that's relevant to this election?
I just think they ought to factor it in when they make their decision in the voting booth.
Are you saying all of this is irrelevant, Vice President Gore, to this election?
No, I think the American people should take into account who we are as individuals, what our experience is, what our positions on the issues are, what our proposals are. I am asking you again to see me for who I really am. I'm offering you my own vision, my own experience, my own proposals. And incidentally, one of them is this. This current campaign financing system has not reflected credit on anybody in either party. And that's one of the reasons I've said before, and I'll pledge here tonight. If I'm president, the very first bill that Joe Lieberman and I will send to the United States Congress is the McCain-Feingold Campaign Finance Reform Bill. And the reason it's that important is that all of the other issues, whether prescription drugs for all seniors that are opposed by the drug companies, or the Patient's Bill of Rights to take the decisions away from the HMOs and give them to the doctors and nurses opposed by the HMOs and insurance companies, all of these other proposals are going to be a lot easier to get passed for the American people if we limit the influence of special interest money and give democracy back to the American people. And I wish Governor Bush would join me this evening in endorsing the McCain-Feingold Campaign Finance Reform Bill.
Governor Bush? Senator McCain said in, excuse me one sec, Vice President Gore. Senator McCain said in August, it doesn't matter which one of you is President of the United States in January, there's going to be blood on the floor of the United States Senate, and he's going to tie up the United States Senate until campaign finance reform is passed that includes a ban on soft money.
Look, Governor Bush, you have attacked my character and credibility, and I am not going to respond in kind. I think we ought to focus on the problems and not attack each other. And one of the serious problems, hear me well, is that our system of government is being undermined by too much influence coming from special interest money. We have to get a handle on it. And like John McCain, I have learned from experience, and it's not a new position for me. 24 years ago, I supported full public financing of all federal elections. And anybody who thinks I'm just saying it'll be the first bill I send to the Congress, I want you to know I care passionately about this, and I will fight until it becomes law. I want to thank everybody who watched and listened tonight, because this is indeed a crucial time in American history. We're at a fork in the road. We have this incredible prosperity, but a lot of people have been left behind. And we have a very important decision to make. Will we use the prosperity to enrich all of our families and not just the few? One important way of looking at this is to ask, who are you going to fight for? Throughout my career in public service, I have fought for the working men and women of this country, middle-class families. Why? Because you are the ones who have the hardest time paying taxes, the hardest time making ends meet. You are the ones who are making car payments and mortgage payments and doing right by your kids, and a lot of times there are powerful forces arrayed against you. And make no mistake about it, they do have undue influence in Washington, D.C., and it makes a difference if you have a president who will fight for you. I know one thing about the position of president. It's the only position in our Constitution that's filled by an individual who is given the responsibility to fight not just for one state or one district or the well-connected or wealthy, but to fight for all of the people, including especially those who most need somebody who will stand up and take on whatever powerful forces might stand in the way. There's a woman named Winifred Skinner here tonight from Iowa. I mentioned her earlier. She's 79 years old. She has Social Security. I'm not going to cut her benefits or support any proposal that would. She gets a small pension, but in order to pay for her prescription drug benefits, she has to go out 7 days a week, several hours a day, picking up cans. She came all the way from Iowa in a Winnebago with her poodle in order to attend here tonight. And I want to tell her, I am going to fight for a prescription drug benefit for all seniors, and I'm going to fight for the people of this country for a prosperity that benefits all.
And we will continue this dialogue next week on October the 11th at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The format then will be more informal, more conversational, with the two candidates seated at a table with me. The third will be October 17th at Washington University in St. Louis, and that will follow a town hall type format. Also ahead, the day after tomorrow, on October 5th, there's the 90-minute debate between the Democratic candidate for Vice President, Senator Joe Lieberman, and the Republican candidate, former Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney. It will be held at Center College in Danville, Kentucky. The moderator will be Bernard Shaw of CNN. Thank you, Governor Bush, Vice President Gore. See you next week. And for now, from Boston, I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.